forget about it because that's the kind of time frame I'm looking at. And I'm sure.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what you do in NBA. You set it at like 9 a.m. and you don't look at it till lock, and it'll usually be good.
Well,
That's probably the way to
you don't even
approach
look
it.
at it at lock. You look at
Yeah,
it
you don't
after
even
the
look
You
at
look
it
at it
at
once you've won the
all.
money. Once you've won the
you
money.
look at it when the games are over and you print money and then you withdraw, and that's how it works.
Yeah, that's pretty much
There's
NBA
no
in a nutshell. Like no news. Don't pay attention to any news. Just lock it in at 9 a.m. and you'll be good.
Nobody loses at NBA.
That sounds like my kind of sport, but I'll keep losing money if I'm kind of feeling like a loser lately, so I'll keep losing money on football. First game of this football slate, it's like a shallower slate in terms of amount of games. It's the most teams on bye this week, but honestly, I enjoy this slate much more than I did the last one. So first game we have the Cardinals versus the Bucks. I have right here Cardinals are 4.5 point road dogs. It's a 52 point total right now. That stands as the highest on the slate. It has dropped 2 points, but it's still the highest. So I guess, John, my first question is it finally a Chris Godwin week? I thought this was the every other game rule between Chris Godwin's and Mike Evans. I played Chris Godwin's, and it cursed me last week. So what are we doing this week with these two?
I'll be honest. I love pretty much everybody on the Tampa Bay side. Tampa Bay has they're tied for the second highest team total. I know it did come down a couple points since the open, but love the spot for them at home against an up-tempo Arizona Cardinals defense. I think Jameis Winston is priced up, but he's thrown for 300 yards in 3 straight games. And Arizona's given up the most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks this season. Mike Evans obviously has been balling out. I honestly, my opinion, Mike Evans broke the air yards site because he literally got all the air yards over the past 3 weeks. Now the site's broken. That's my greasy theory. Play Mike Evans, play Chris Godwin. And the other play that I like in this game, who I think will be less popular, is Ronald Jones. Ronald Jones was finally named the starter by Bruce Arians, saw 18 carries, 2 or 3 targets, season high snap rate, and Peyton Barber saw a season low, only played on 13% of snaps. So if Ronald Jones is going to see that type of usage at 4,300 at home against the Arizona Cardinals, I think he's borderline cash viable this week on a week where we don't have a ton of salary. So what do you think about that, Bob? Are you on the Ronald Jones train, and are you targeting any of the Arizona pass catchers on the other side?
Yes, I really like the Jones call at 4,300. I think the Tampa Bay side in general is like pretty interesting. And me and Kyle just hopped on a show, and he was hitting on Brashad Perryman as well, number 19, not number 12. So in cash games last week, every time they kept throwing at Perryman, who had a significant amount of targets, I was hoping it was Godwin, number 12, but it was Perryman. So I think on the Tampa Bay side, Ronald Jones and Perryman, depending on their ownership, I think that this game just makes for a good game stack all around. Like I think in cash on the Arizona side, Kyler is going to be pretty popular along with Christian Kirk, and on the Tampa side, like it'd be more suited for like GPPs for me, I would say. And guys like Ronald Jones, Rashad Perryman, OJ Howard would not like just the 3 of those guys in general. I'm just saying like I'd be moving those guys out of like 3-man game stacks with 4-man game stacks, like running 3 guys from Tampa and maybe like a guy on the Arizona side or something like that. But I'd be mixing them in with Godwin, Evans, Winston stacks. So that's kind of how I see Tampa Bay. And then on the Arizona side, I think Arizona's interesting. Christian Kirk, Kyler Murray, and maybe like a Keyshawn Johnson for tournaments. Some they get a little different versus Tampa Bay pass defense that's been god awful, where they've been actually pretty good versus the run. So it's all going to depend on ownership for me, but I think this game's definitely something to kind of look to later on in the week once we get that. Kyle, any thoughts on this game?
Yeah, no, I agree with the Rashad Perriman call because it's my call. But he did see 8 targets last week and scored once, caught 4 of those targets. And I think people might look to the tight end situation. It's just for me, they don't seem to they're just not using OJ Howard. He's a horrible blocker, so it's hard for him to get a lot of snaps. But if he does play, that eats into Cameron Brate enough that they just sabotage each other. And they've been fine trotting out Rashad Perriman as their wide receiver 3, so I think he's a viable play like probably closer like MME 150 enter level, but I still think he's viable. On the Arizona side, I think David Johnson's price at 5,700 is super interesting. I think we see him basically get the same split he saw with Chase Edmonds like early in the season. So that makes him very interesting at 5,700. But this Tampa Bay team has been just like absolutely punishing their running backs. So I'd probably just look to Christian Kirk, and then you could possibly run it with like Keyshawn Johnson as well. Not seeing a ton of volume, but he has been their deep threat given that they run 2 slots, and that's where most of their volume goes. He's their primary deep threat, but primary with like large asterisks around it. So I don't know. I think it's pretty easy to just run Kirk and then run Tampa Bay stacks, in my opinion.
Yeah, I like that call. Do you think anything with Kenyon Drake at 5,500? I know Edmonds was kind of running, seeing a lot of usage with Johnson out, and then Christian Kirk was out as well, and Edmonds was running from the slot. So it might hinder like Drake's passing upside in this situation if he was to assume the Edmonds role. But any thoughts on Kenyon Drake, John?
Yeah, for what it's worth, David Johnson came out and said he's 100% playing this week. So who knows if we can trust him or not? But
so he's definitely not playing.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
From what I was reading, if he does play, it looks like Arizona plans on putting both Drake and DJ or Chase Edmonds, basically having 2 of those 3 on the field at all times, which I think is definitely interesting from a pass catching standpoint, because pretty much all 3 of those guys are capable pass catchers. So I guess we just kind of have to wait on news to see what type of role each of them are going to play and who's all active before we kind of make those decisions.
Yeah, and the Tampa Bay side, like you hit on Howard, and Howard going up against this Arizona pass D that we've kind of streamed tight ends against. Like I don't hate Howard coming off an injury as another way to kind of differentiate yourself within this Tampa Bay offense. That's pretty much it. Kyle, what game we got next?
Next game we have is Kansas City versus Tennessee. Right now, it's like a speculative line of Kansas City minus 5.5. But it's hard to really project anything from this because it will swing wildly based on whether Patrick Mahomes plays or not. And at this point, we don't know. I think if he plays, it's a very interesting spot, like borderline to stack, because we've seen Ryan Tannehill get there both through passing and on the ground. I think last week he hit the 300-yard bonus. The week before, he threw like 3 touchdowns. He's like, despite him being historically not a great player, he's got talent around him, and they've been like letting him run as well. He got 38 yards and a touchdown last week, so he kind of has multiple avenues to pay off, and he's super cheap. I think it's 5,100, so I don't mind running him. But for me, I'm not sure who I would stack him with. John, any insight onto the AJ Brown, Corey Davis split, Jonnu Smith working in, and of course Derrick Henry scored a receiving touchdown despite being an awful receiver. So there's that.
So I actually think Derrick Henry is like a sneaky good receiver. Like every time they throw, shocker, I know, right? I like Derrick Henry. Every time they throw a screen to him, though, like it's a 70-yard touchdown every single time.
TD,
like
TD, automatic TD.
It is every single time, and yet you never see them use him like how the Packers use Aaron Jones, or like I don't know, man. It's so aggravating because I think he could be a legit like serviceable. At a minimum pass catcher, and they just don't use him in that role. But as far as like between AJ Brown and Corey Davis, Jonnu Smith, like they're all just kind of thin tournament plays for me. If I were playing multiple lineups, then sure, I'd have some interest in kind of stacking it a little bit, but not really a ton of interest for me on the Tennessee side. And for what it's worth, Patrick Mahomes did practice today without limitation, so he is looking like a full go this week.
Yeah, if Mahomes plays, I think that Tennessee sees a pace-up spot, and I do have some interest in the Tennessee side in that case. Speaking on Derrick Henry, like I think the reason he does so well catching passes on the outside is because they were kind of doing it earlier in the year. The new offensive coordinator was trying to get him throw him screens to where he'd be situated on like smaller cornerbacks, and then they'd have to make a tackle on a guy who's like 6'4", 280. So I think that's why we see him score in those situations, but they've gone away from it. I know he caught one last week, but it's just interesting that they'd go away from it because it seems to work like every time. In terms of like Corey Davis, AJ Brown, I think I prefer AJ Brown for the Tennessee side as receivers. Brown's has the bigger frame. seeing a lot of red zone targets, so I don't mind him. And on the KC side, like Tyreek Hill, 7,700. I just think that's a really good price that you're getting him at, and Mahomes is 7K. Like Mahomes at 7K, even versus good pass defense like Tennessee. Like I still think that paying up for him would be contrarian, or paying up just to stack KC would be contrarian, and they have a 26.8 team total, one of the higher team totals on the slate. So like obviously if you're paying up for them, you're not going to get to McCaffrey stacking like Mahomes, Tyreek, and Kelsey, but it's a way to be different. I don't hate it. Kyle, any thoughts?
Yeah, I actually feel kind of dumb because I mean, I know it's only Wednesday, but it just never really crossed my mind to play Mahomes, despite the fact that it was probably week 4 where we were talking about how he was breaking the pricing algorithm, that he had just gone 30, 30, 30. And it was just like there was no price where it wasn't viable to play him. And because he hasn't played since was week 7, it's kind of didn't cross my mind, but I actually think that's very in play. And yeah, I would probably look to like you can run him, you can just run him naked. That's fine. Like if you were to play him in like lower size tournaments, but I would probably look to run him back with Kelsey because I think paying up at tight end is going to be rather contrarian, just because it's kind of hard to pay up at a lot of spots this week. So for me, I think paying up for Travis Kelsey, assuming Mahomes plays, is pretty sharp. Still seeing like just regular Travis Kelsey volume, has 8 targets or more in his past 3 games. It's a bit harder to get there with Matt Moore. So I think paying up for Kelsey is probably very contrarian. If you stack him with Mahomes, then run him back with I don't know, a Brown or a Corey Davis. So yeah, I like that call.
Yeah, so just to kind of harp on it again, like one of the biggest questions on decision points in the slate is going to be McCaffrey. Like, if we're looking for ways to beat McCaffrey, like going to a team like KC with a 26.8 team total, with firepower like Mahomes, Tyreek, Kelsey, they're all in a situations where, like, because of roster construction, it's going to be different. Like, this is kind of a beatable, like, a way you can kind of beat McCaffrey builds. Even at 10-5, John's going to not like that call and trying to be with the field, or not fading him, but being with the field on him, I think would be the play. I don't know if you're MMEing. And also, like, Tennessee plays pace down, so that would be one negative. John, what do you think about uh, McCaffrey? I think we'll get into it later, but I know you were against, like, definitely not fading him, correct?
No, I mean, and really, it comes down to like you said, how many lineups you're playing. Like, because basically in tournaments, like nobody's an automatic lock. Like unless it's like a 3,600 or something like that starting running back. Like there are definitely paths to where Christian McCaffrey scores 28 to 35 and doesn't end up on the optimal lineup. So can you come up with builds that have high upside that could outproduce him? Absolutely. So in cash games, you'd be an idiot to fade him, but in tournaments, I'm on board. There's definitely paths to where you can find lineups that don't need him.
There's no way I'm fading him in cash, but in tournaments, like 10-5, like when is too much? When does a price just get to be too much? And I just think that it's in the range of outcomes that he fails this week. So
Yeah, I think that probably covers everything from this game, especially since McCaffrey's not even in it. Let's move to no.
But do you understand why? Like that was Casey's a way you can beat him. That's pretty much.
Yeah, no. And I actually think in cash we talked about how expensive he is, but I actually think this is like a sneaky value slate. There are some good values. So my next game maybe has one of them. We have the Browns 2.5 point home favorites versus the Bills. 40.5 point total has come down, 40.5 point over under has come down a point since opening. I think the question that is on my mind, John, I don't know if you have any insight into this. 3K for Kareem Hunt, who was like probably a top 5 running back last year before getting cut by the Chiefs, and probably a top 5 running back the year before that. Like stone cold minimum seems like the time that FanDuel forgot to price up Golden Tate coming off suspension. They just forgot about him. And I know, like Nick Chubb, I think he's had 20 carries in each of his past 3 games. But if he takes over that Dontrell Hilliard role, he plays well. They give him more snaps throughout the game. Are you at all interested in Kareem Hunt at like the stone minimum?
Yeah, I'd be lying if I said I didn't take a peek at him at only 3K. And like I said, I do expect him to, if not take over the Hilliard role at a minimum. I think, Hilliard played on like 36% of snaps last week. That's a pretty big, significant role, especially if Kareem Hunt's going to mix in on passing downs and goal line work as well. So at 3K in tournaments, especially like lower stakes where he's going to be completely unowned, I think some sharper people and maybe some of the mid to high stakes might be on him a little bit as like a thin but high upside tournament play. He's definitely not the worst play. I actually thought you were going to mention another value play that I like in this game on the other side is Devin Singletary. Devin Singletary's basically taken over the lead back role for Buffalo now. It seems like they're finally letting old man Frank Gore dust Gore. They're laying him to rest. So Devin Singletary is a guy that I like a lot. Actually, he's only 5K, considering he's probably going to see 20 or so touches in this game. And Cleveland has been bad against the run. The last few years they've been solid, but this year they've been really bad. Basically, the last 4 games, they've given up 114 rushing yards and a touchdown to Matt Breida, 97 rushing yards and a touchdown to Coleman, Chris Carson, 124 and a touchdown, Sony Michel, 74, Lindsey, 92 and a touchdown. So basically, they're getting gashed by the run. We know Buffalo wants to establish the run, and they're going to do that by Devin Singletary. I like him this week as a value play.
Yeah, I actually was on Singletary last week in tournaments, and there were 4 goal. He left points on the table. There were 4 goal line opportunities, and they were all given to Frank Gore earlier in the game, and he was stonewalled on all 4. So I definitely like the Singletary call. And then they went back to Frank Gore on like a 4th and 1, which made absolutely no sense. I like Singletary, not on Josh Allen, not really on Josh Brown. On the Cleveland side, Kareem Hunt, he's cheap. I get it. I feel like he'll eat into Nick Chubb, which makes me a little nervous. I kind of like Nick Chubb for tournaments because Buffalo is pretty much a run funnel. On the Cleveland side, in terms of pass catchers, Jarvis Landry and Antonio Callaway, I think, are interesting. Jarvis Landry at 4,900 and Callaway at 33. Odell should see Denzel Ward would be on John Brown in this game. Odell will see Tre'Davious White. I'm not really on Odell, but 6,100, the price has come down significantly. But yeah, I think the best tournament play from this game would be Nick Chubb. Kyle, what say you, bud?
Yeah, actually, before we get into that, I have a question. Do you what ownership? I guess John, do you think we'll see on Singletary? Because I don't think he'll be a sneaky play. I think everyone kind of saw the breakout, and I think he's just going to be a popular play in general. Because he's a good play, because he's legit good play. So
yeah, I think he's going to be really popular. I think he'll be more popular in cash games than tournaments. But I wouldn't be surprised to see him, mid-20s in tournaments, especially in the lower stakes.
Yeah, so that kind of leads into my take on Chubb, which is that he's a guy who's gotten a ton of volume. Like last week, I think he got 20 carries and 4 or 5 targets, and that's happened consistently throughout the season. He's like 5th or 6th in touches per game, and he gets to play, like Bob said, a run funnel defense in the Bills. He's also he is a 2.5 point home favorite. He also, the defense for the Browns generates a lot of sacks. Josh Allen gives up a lot of sacks, turns the ball over. They're also the cheapest home favorite defense on the slate at 2,500. I think stacking Chubb with the Browns defense and fading Singletary is an interesting tournament leverage play if Singletary does end up being as popular as I think he will be.
And you say fading Singletary, they could go right back to Frank Gore. Like they had no issue doing it on the goal line 4 times last week. So I just don't like. I get Singletary in cash, like it makes sense, but I think there's credence to that call in terms of Chubb.
Yeah, I think I'm ready to move on to the next game. We have Baltimore at the Bengals. Bengals 10-point home dogs. The total has moved down to 44.5, down 2 points. I mean, how good is Lamar Jackson? He's just so good. Beat the Patriots pretty handily. I think he's on pace right now for 1,000 rushing yards. He is the highest priced quarterback on the slate at 7,300. And I think there are good enough values that I won't be getting to him, in cash or anything. But I could not blame you for playing like mid to high running back 2 along with a good quarterback in your quarterback spot. So Bobby, how are you attacking like Lamar Jackson? He's so high priced, but he scores so many fantasy points.
Yeah, at this point, he's like a fourth running back. I think you do have to kind of consider him in cash. I don't know if you have to go there, but they have the highest team total on the slate. Well, second highest team total on the slate, around 27 points. So Lamar Jackson for me would be someone who'd definitely be in play. Um, I just like that's kind of how I would take the approach. I don't know if I want to stack him with anyone. Marquise Brown hasn't seen the usage. Hayden Hurst, Mark Andrews, Nick Boyle. Like they run three tight ends. Nick Boyle obviously had the big game last week. John was hiding the secret plays, so he didn't tell everyone else. But Nick Boyle was a good play on the Monday night game. Only John knew. Yeah, I just for me like the Baltimore side would just be Lamar Jackson. I'm not going to pay up for it. Ingram could be fine in tournaments. I hate saying it at 7,100 with relatively no passing game usage and Gus Edwards kind of eating in, but they are playing Cincinnati. John, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm on the same page as you. Lamar Jackson, I think, is the top cash game quarterback just because you on a slate that's ugly at quarterback, I'm willing to pay up for the type of floor and ceiling that he has. Rush for 60 or more in 5 straight games. Like you just don't see that type of safety from any other quarterback on the slate. So I know he's pricey, but honestly, there's enough value where I'm going to prioritize getting up to him. And I'm with you. Mark Ingram's in play as well. I know he has no passing game role, but if they're projected to score 4 touchdowns, Mark Ingram could realistically run 2 of them in and pay off that salary. But those are the only 2 guys. AJ Green expected to be back. Not interested on anybody on the Cincinnati side.
No Tyler Boyd. I think we seen last year, like with splits, like when AJ Green was actually in the lineup, Boyd did better at 4,700. I think point per dollar. I'm a little bit interested. Any thoughts there?
It's not terrible. I didn't really think about it too much, but he is cheap. I know Baltimore's secondary has been better over the last few weeks, but I don't
No,
I
that's
don't
a
weigh
good
the
point.
matchup. I don't weigh the matchup too much though. So if I was playing, more lineups than I do, then I'd have a little bit more interest, I guess.
Yeah, I actually like.
Interesting.
I actually like think Boyd is a fine run back if you're running Lamar Jackson, but I would only play him in the event AJ Green doesn't play, which they say he expects to play, but it's Wednesday and he's yet to practice. So I like it's definitely within his range of outcomes to not play, and I just think that the like I don't know volume trumps all for me, and I would expect if AJ Green comes back, that's a downtrodden volume for Boyd. Like I get like the splits were what they were last season, but for me, I'm just chasing volume. And so far, Boyd has 5 games of double-digit targets. I don't expect that to happen again if AJ Green plays. One more thing I just want to touch on Marquise Brown, because I actually think he's a really good play this week. Like not like cash game consideration, but I think like we saw in weeks 2 through 4, he averaged 31 routes per game and played like roughly 70% of the snaps every game. Actually, it's probably closer to 75 to 80. Like once he's healthy, they've been treating him as their number one, like their clear number one receiver. Even though they run a lot of these heavy tight end sets, they've still been getting him on the field. So I think last week, coming into a game against New England, coming off I believe it was an ankle injury, it made sense they played him about half the snaps. But when he's healthy, they've just been like using him like any team would use their number one receiver. So I think he's actually a pretty solid play.
Are we overlooking like Brad? Like I think we were spot on with Brown in terms of tournaments. If we were to kind of 3-man stack this, like where would you guys be considering? Where would you guys think to go? Would you go Willie Snead? Would you go one of these tight ends? I'm just thinking from tournament perspective. Any
Honestly,
interest?
yeah, I mean, on the Baltimore side, I'd be really cautious about double stacking Lamar just because there's not a ton of volume. Like basically, if you look at their past games, when one guy did pop, whether it was Andrews or Marquise Brown, almost I think there was only one time, I believe, week 1 where they actually
Week
both went
one, no.
off. Yeah.
So
Um,
that's what I'm kind of thinking is like maybe this could turn into a week one situation versus Cincinnati secondary that's been absolutely awful. Their implied team total is 27. There's no reason for them to really throw in the game script, but I don't know.
Yeah, Cincinnati actually allows the most yards per attempt to opposing passers by like a pretty reasonably
Exactly.
pretty reasonably wide margin. They allow like 8.6 yards per attempt. The next team is 8.3. Like they're just the worst team in the NFL.
It sucks that these tight end heavy sets, because you're not going to have enough opportunity with Brown, Snead, or like Boykin on the field at the same time to kind of game stack them, and then you're relying on like low A dot tight ends to make plays downfield for you, which isn't great. And you're picking between three of them. There's so many reasons not to, but there's also like with how bad Cincinnati is versus the past. It's like I wish there was more there, that you could go like Lamar, Marquise, and like a Snead or a Boykin or something. Even Andrews now, he's being eaten into with Boyle and Hayden Hurst. Like he's not even as viable anymore.
I would say, I don't know, maybe like basically up until week 9, Mark Andrews had at least 7 targets in every single game. Week 9, they ran the ball a lot. Like that's how they chose to attack the Patriots, and of course, like they ran their like more blocking heavy tight ends, Nick Boyle and Hayden Hurst. But potentially, if they end up throwing a decent amount, which is how you would attack the Bengals, they're awful in every facet, but they're particularly awful against the pass. So maybe at that point, Mark Andrews gets back from a 3-target game, which like if that's like a realistic projection for him, you would never play him at 3 targets. But if you can expect close to that 7 targets a game, yeah, I'd probably run. If you think that the Miami type of game is in the range of outcomes, which against the Bengals it has to sort of be, I'd just run the like clear, obvious plays in Mark Andrews, Marquise Brown, Lamar Jackson. So.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to kind of approach it.
All right, let's move on to our next game. We have the Giants versus the Jets. Jets are 2.5-point home dogs. It's a 43.5-point total. I guess both of the running backs in this game have to be in play because they're like these, definitive 3-down backs. Le'Veon Bell looks like he's on pace to play, but I think that's something that we'll just have to monitor throughout the week. So for me, this game starts with Evan Ingram out, Sterling Shepard out. Darius Slayton is probably where I'd look to elsewise, just because Golden Tate, I think, got a pretty nice price up to $5,900, I believe. So I think that's a fine price for him, but you're not really getting much value as opposed to Slayton at $4,200. High A dot guy, so I think he's got like a good weekly ceiling. And then, of course, Saquon Barkley, I think at 8,800, especially given how much you think volume could just funnel to him, he's a very interesting play at 8,800. Bobby, how would you attack this game given that basically like the only living souls left on this team are like Barkley and Golden Tate?
I actually think this is pretty interesting. I like the Daniel Jones, Saquon, Slayton stack. I'm on Slayton. He was the kind of a guy that popped for me. Pretty much the same, kind of seeing it the same way you are. It's interesting. I'd like to know where the money is on this game, because if the total moves to the over, I think it's definitely makes that stack more viable. And then running it back, like you say, you don't want to run it back, or you don't want to run like Sam Darnold. He's been so bad, man. But I don't mind Crowder at 5K. He had a great game last week. I feel like a lot of people were on him like in higher stakes. I kind of missed that play, so I'm kind of tilted about that. But I don't mind him or Anderson. I kind of like Robbie Anderson if we get like low ownership. Obviously sees a good amount of snaps versus this Giant secondary. I don't mind him as well if you're running it back and you think this game could shoot out. Him and Slayton could go back and forth. It wouldn't be bad for tournaments.
John, what do you like? Any interest in the Jets side? Because I feel like the Giants side is pretty set that Slayton will probably get a decent amount of deep looks. Tate getting a ton of volume out of the slot, and then Saquon. I don't think there's anywhere else to go. Like obviously Daniel Jones, but it feels like the Jets side is more open to interpretation.
Yeah, I don't have much interest in the Jets side. I am going to look at this game a little bit closer just because, 2 New York teams. I think it's going to be interesting. 22% of the bets are on New York. 78% are on the Giants. 22% are on the Jets. But the line actually moved half a point in favor of the Jets as the home dog. So I'm going to have to look at it a little bit closer. I actually didn't even know Evan Ingram was out until you said it, Kyle. So I do like the Slayton call for that Bob had, just because he is seeing some of those looks. So My initial lean is I like the Giants side more here, just with increased usage for those other guys. The Jets have just been such a disaster. I don't know if I could trust any of them. And Crowder is fine. He's seen volume, but he's priced up. So again, I don't love it.
All right, I'm ready to move on to our next game. We have the Falcons versus the Saints. Saints have the highest implied team total, 32, and they are 13-point favorites. That makes it a 51-point game total. In the Superdome, you've got Drew Brees. I think he is like viable for cash. For me, it's going to be difficult to parse out. There are some good pay up spots at quarterback. I'm getting McCaffrey in cash, no doubt. Michael Thomas has had a higher floor than any of the top running backs this season. I don't think he's gone under 15 DK points this season, whereas we've seen McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, Leonard Fournette all do that. His floor is it's not receiver like. So what is your priority level on Michael Thomas in cash, Bobby?
I think you have to kind of look to him. I think he's the highest point per dollar play on the slate. He's the highest projected player on the slate. I'm pretty positive, him and Alvin Kamara. So I'm definitely interested in the two of him. Yeah, Thomas is the highest in terms of wide receivers. And the matchup's is fantastic. So I don't mind Thomas. I don't mind Kamara at all either. Kamara is grading out a little higher than McCaffrey at this point. So I like him. I also think Teddy Ginn's pretty interesting at 3,700 for a game like this. But I feel like a lot of people are going to go to Teddy Ginn, and there's another guy in this game, Russell Gage, on the Atlanta side at 3,400 with the departure of Mohamed Sanu. I feel like he could be pretty popular. I think he's seen 8 targets last game. He's going to be working the slot. He's in there with Ridley and Hooper. When people might go to Ridley, I think the sharper people that are going to look at the target share are going to look to Russell Gage. And I like Matt Ryan, John's guy, a ton in the spot. I think the game script fits him really well. And this is another game where we don't know where the usage is going to go, but I don't know. It's just I think it's a way to get different on the Atlanta side. There's more ways to get different. I think there's ways to get different in this game. You have to stack up this game, pretty much. And there's a lot of different ways you can go. So I like this game for tournaments, cash. John, any thoughts?
Yeah, I want to get one thing clear. Matt Ryan will never be referred to as my boy ever again after I played him in cash and he put up 4 fantasy points and then got hurt in the third quarter and left. So he is definitely not my boy. I moved on to Matty Stafford. So those Matty Ice days are over. But I'm with you, though. I do like pretty much all of the pieces you mentioned in this game. I think Austin Hooper definitely needs to be talked about at a weak tight end position at 5,500. Calvin Ridley, 5,400 with no Sanu, like you said. Saints have been getting gashed in the slot all season, so I think Ridley could benefit there. And Julio Jones is only the fourth most expensive wide receiver. And I know Atlanta's been bad, but Julio Jones historically crushes the Saints. He has 90 or more receiving yards in 3 straight games. So I think Julio in tournaments could be potentially pretty low owned here, considering the spot that he's in, and they're going to be throwing as big underdogs here. So I like pretty much all the pieces you mentioned in this game, and I'm on the Ted Ginn train as well at only 3,700.
Yeah, I think you guys covered pretty much everything. I want to double down on Russell Gage. He was a team preseason guy. I honestly don't even remember if he actually hit or if he was just projected to hit. But last week without Mohamed Sanu, the first game without Mohamed Sanu, I guess 2 weeks ago, their last game without Mohamed Sanu, he ran 33 routes, played on 61% of the team snaps, 9 targets. It's just it kind of reminds me of the Jacob Hollister from the Seahawks play, where if you just get a guy who's playing on the field a lot in a game with a lot of scoring, your touchdowns per salary dollar projection is incredibly high. You get an incredibly high upside for a guy who he's 3,600 or something.
34.
Oh Jesus, yeah, I think he's a really good tournament play. And if we had any bit of a larger sample on him, we only have 1 game of him running, we'll call it the Mohamed Sanu role, I'd be much more interested in him borderline cash. But we only have a 1 game sample, so it's hard to project much yet.
Is Traquan Smith playing? What's happened to Traquan Smith? Because he would be another guy on the fast track that I'd like to roster, but just doesn't seem plausible.
Very dust. He's just done. They just completely phased him out. He's not even on the field. It's insane, and it sucks because he's actually talented too.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder.
I legit would have if you asked me what happened to Traquan Smith, I'd be like, oh, he's probably on IR, and he's not. He's literally just that disappeared.
Yeah, it's sad, man. Tough scene.
Yeah. I remember like Monday Night Football last year. He had like 47 points in the Superdome.
Tough scene for all of Bobby's dynasty teams. Sorry for those.
Yeah, so much dynasty I'm playing.
Next game, I think we've covered every angle of that game. We've got the Lions versus the Bears. I don't even know if this is the lowest. It's not the lowest total of the slate technically, but this is probably the one I am the least interested in by far. Bears are 2.5-point home favorites, 41.5-point total. That's moved down 2.5 points. The line movement particularly has me just like it's fine to just complete fade this game. I think David Montgomery's getting enough volume. You have to consider him, but it's really I can't imagine playing anybody on the Chicago Bears offense. What was didn't they literally average 2.5 inches per pass attempt in the first half last week?
Yes.
I think it was 2.3 to be exact. The quarterback is on any team, the quarterback is basically your biggest predictor of how many points your offense is going to score. And when Trubisky is your quarterback, you're not scoring any. So I'm completely fading this game.
How did those Trubisky stacks against the Eagles work for you, Kyle?
I had Zach Ertz in every one of them, so they were I didn't embarrass myself by the final score, but if you actually looked into the lineup, it was embarrassing.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I think Trubisky ended with 6 fantasy points. He's speaking of dust, that dude is done. He's terrible. I think David Montgomery could be a potential trap spot here. I think he could potentially be bad chalk in this game. People looking at it on the outside see him as a home favorite who's put up 20+ DraftKings points in 2 straight games. But if you really look at it, he's been super touchdown dependent. Look at the whole picture on him. He generally only gets you about 40 or 50 rushing yards. If he doesn't score a touchdown, he's only going to get 2 or 3 targets. I know he's gotten a couple more than that recently, but I don't really see him as that great of a play. I definitely prefer Devin Singletary, and I think Montgomery could potentially be pretty heavily owned here. So what do you think about the Montgomery fade, Bob, and are you looking at any of these Detroit guys?
I'm on pretty much fade Chicago. On the Detroit side, I know people are going to go to Stafford, not really interested. Even Galladay and Marvin Jones, I don't really have a ton of interest just because of Chicago's pass defense. But Chicago's defense has been pretty much terrible. The 19.5 team total kind of draw. I don't really want much to do with Detroit for that reason, but I don't hate Montgomery. I don't hate Tariq Cohen on the Chicago side. I get what you're saying, Monk. It could be a trap spot for Montgomery, though. I would definitely rather Singletary.
John, you asked how my Trubisky lineups went. I cashed one of them in the $3.20 max. That's actually a crowning achievement of my DFS career.
That is impressive.
I'm
first cash.
First cash. Baby's first cash. I'm ready to move on from this game. This game is awful. All right, next game we have Indianapolis versus the Dolphins. Indy are 10.5-point home favorites. This game has a 44-point total. The story for me here is the amount of receivers we'll be missing in this game. Preston Williams done for the year. Paris Campbell out a few weeks. T.Y. Hilton not expected back. So Zach Pascal for the Colts was basically elevated to their number 1 receiver role. Last week at 4,100, he was just pretty much free money. I think he's scored and easily paid off value. Now he's priced up to 5,300. I'm much less interested in him there. I think the value here for me is on the other side with Devontae Parker probably taking over as the unquestioned number 1 receiver on this team that's probably going to be throwing a lot as 10.5-point dogs. And then Gesicki, basically for the same reason, has 20 targets over the past 4 weeks. Then he's this week's Noah Fant. And also, he's 3rd in air yards, RIP, in the past 3 weeks among tight ends. It's young, athletic tight end getting deep targets at the position for almost exactly $3K. It's Noah Fant 2.0.
The only difference with him and Noah Fant is Mike Gesicki is actually good at football.
Don't you dare.
So I am all in on Mike Gesicki at 3,100. I think he is the top cash game play at the position. That's always weak. You mentioned a couple of the stats. 40 or more receiving yards in 3 of his 4 last games, 6 targets last week. with no Preston Williams, he was already third on the team in targets behind Preston Williams and Devontae Parker. So we're only going to see an uptick here, and Indianapolis kind of funnels targets to the middle of the field, so that could be even more volume for a guy like Gesicki who runs those short intermediate routes. So I think that's a really sharp call. And, surprisingly, the Dolphins team total, even with the injuries here and the suspension of Mark Walton, the team total has come up 1.2 points so far since the open. So it's still ugly, but a little encouraging for a Mike Gesicki fan club.
Yeah, I'm with you with Gesicki. Just plug him in cash. Allows you to get up to McCaffrey. So you need the savings. Get all the volume at Preston Williams out of the situation. Any Kalen Ballage thoughts? I know, I feel like we have to kind of touch on it.
Yeah, I've had a lot of dark Kalen Ballage thoughts. Like, how bad can a player be? He's caught like a third of his passes, and that's atrocious for any player, especially a running back who's got probably like a negative ADOT. He was a guy who beat reporters thought looked good all offseason, and Miami's just utterly refuted that, playing him behind Kenyon Drake, behind Mark Walton. I expect we see like a committee with a lot of I don't know who Patrick Laird is, but Myles Gaskin, I expect we see a decent amount of him. Just to the point where Kalen Ballage is not going to get enough market share of this team's running back work, touches in general, both catches and carries, that he's actually worth it at any price essentially.
Yeah, going back to my words on Noah Fant, that's actually disrespectful to Noah Fant because Kalen Ballage is confirmed the worst player in the NFL. That's fact. He's had multiple games with 10 touches that resulted in 1 fantasy point. He's worthless. And the scary thing is, I guess it's good for us, is people are actually going to play him this week. They're going to say, a starting running back under 4K, he's 3,800, going to see 15 touches. But we've seen these Dolphins backs, even with 10 to 15 touches, it's not really all that valuable when they're not scoring touchdowns, when they're not moving the chains. And like I said, we've seen him, I'm pretty sure it was week 2 or week 3 where he actually had 10 carries for 8 yards. He is confirmed bad. So I want no part of it, but I'm glad you brought it up, Bob, because like I said, I think people are actually going to play him.
Yeah, I feel like we had to bring it up because he is a starting running back under 4K. I wasn't planning on playing him. I just had no, I couldn't bring myself to play him, but I just thought we had to at least touch on it. On the Indy side, you guys kind of hit on pretty much everything. Pascal, I like. That's pretty much it. Kyle, can we move on to the next?
Yes, we can. We have the Rams versus the Steelers. Steelers are 3.5-point home dogs. This line has moved from, or I guess the total has moved from 45 opening to now 43.5. Another game with negative line movement or negative total movement. So for me, I like the way Pittsburgh is playing the ball right now with James Conner out is to just run their entire offense through Jalen Samuels dump offs, and I think that sets up for a pretty slow down, bad offense in general, but also that just makes this game a bit less appealing for me. The total seems to agree with just that general sentiment, so I'm probably just looking to run 1 or 2 players from either team. Jalen Samuels now priced up to 6,300. My biggest concern with him is I believe he was out carried by Trey Edmonds last week, 8 to 10 carries. And if you're just getting the receiving game work, it's hard for me to bet on a guy getting 12 or 13 targets again at the running back position. So at 6,300, he's probably just priced out of the point where I'll play him. Bobby, any interest in Jalen Samuels from what we saw last week?
Trey Edmonds, converted tight end. I don't hate Samuels if they're chasing, which they likely will be versus the Rams. But 6,300 is priced up, and it's a lot of low dump off target. I think it makes sense. I don't hate it because on the Rams side, I really like Cooper Kupp at 7,300. Slot receivers, Pittsburgh tends to cover them with linebackers, and if you cover Cooper Kupp with a linebacker, you're going to get burned. So I like Cooper Kupp a lot, and I wouldn't mind running it back with Samuels, I guess, or Deontay Johnson for that matter, who's pretty priced down at 4,300. Josh Reynolds is in play. Brandon Cooks is out. Josh Reynolds around 3,800. Kyle tipped me to Josh Reynolds on our last show, so just bring him up there. Any thoughts, John, where you'd like to go in this game?
Yeah, not much interest on the Pittsburgh side. I know Vance McDonald is pretty cheap at tight end. I guess you can look there in tournaments, but I don't have a ton of interest in this game at all. I was kind of viewing it as James Conner being active. I know he was limited in practice. I'd be surprised if he was out again. So I was kind of viewing the Steelers side from that point. If he was ruled out again, though, I'm fine with Jalen Samuels, but like you guys said, he's priced up to where probably he should be. So in that aspect, he's not like a lock or anything like that. But I do like the Cooper Kupp call. Pittsburgh has been really stingy against wide receivers, but not so much in the slot. So the Cooper Kupp call would be the only place I'd really look in this game, assuming James Conner is active.
For me, I actually think. Go ahead.
Juju down at 5,800. It's in obviously I don't really want to think I want to play Juju, but getting him at one of the cheaper prices, I think we've probably seen all year. Kyle, you can go ahead, and I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah. I think I'm actually strongly considering Josh Reynolds in cash, given that he literally just took over the Brandon Cooks role. He just T1000 morphed himself into Brandon Cooks, played on 93% of the team snaps, ran 30 routes, 8 targets in the last time we saw him play in week 8, and Brandon Cooks out again this week. So for me, he's basically, you're just paying $3,800 for Brandon Cooks. And is it $3,800? I believe that's what it is. Maybe it's $36. But either way, just at that price, I don't know how you couldn't play Brandon Cooks, which is what he's doing. So, yeah, 38.
Yeah, last year he saw significant red zone usage when Cooper Kupp was out, and it was pretty much he was assuming more of the Cooper Kupp role. So I don't know if that would be relevant to this season, but just something to note.
So real quick, Josh Reynolds or Russell Gage, who would you guys like more, since they're both cheap possible?
Yeah, I've thought I might have thought the most today about Josh Reynolds versus Russell Gage than anyone else in the world. It's an interesting thought to have. I would probably play Josh Reynolds because we have seen them integrate him into their offense, like Bobby was talking about last year. He has a history of being used in this offense when any of their receivers misses, whereas Russell Gage we don't have that history of projections for him. So I think he's basically that same level of play. I'm just more confidently projecting Josh Reynolds to take over a number 3 role.
Yeah, I think in cash it would definitely be Reynolds. In tournaments or game stacks, I would prefer Gage just because that's the highest total game on the slate. And it's just a way to differentiate yourself. So that would be it for me.
All right, our next and last game of the slate, Carolina Panthers versus Green Bay. Green Bay 5.5-point home favorites. Totals, again, dropped 1.5 from 48 to 46.5. This game, we've talked about McCaffrey to death, so I think I want to talk about the receivers on Carolina. DJ Moore, another awesome scoreless game, but I believe did get the 100-yard bonus, whereas Curtis Samuel scored. Both these guys are one of them gets the short high percentage catches in DJ Moore, but then Curtis Samuel owns all the air yards. Where are you going this week? Both of them are still pretty cheap. I think Curtis Samuel's 46 and DJ Moore's 52 off the top of my head. So, John, where are you going with these receivers?
Yeah, I think you can look at both of them. Both of them are still underpriced. DJ Moore has been balling out, and I don't know what he has to do to get a price increase. Obviously, like you said, he hit the 100-yard bonus last week, but I believe he's had let's see, how many? Yeah, at least 8 targets in 4 straight games for DJ Moore. 5,200 in a good matchup against Green Bay in a game that I think has some shootout potential. Just lock him in cash for me. I'd prefer DJ Moore over Curtis Samuel this week.
Yeah, I think that's the right call in terms of DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel. I think I'd probably prefer DJ Moore. Yeah, I don't like McCaffrey. I feel like he's the most difficult call on this. I would just say be with the field on McCaffrey if you're MMEing. I think that makes the most sense. You can fade him in 50% of your lineups, and you can have him in 50% of your lineups, and then build that way. Any thoughts on Aaron Jones? 8 carries last week, and he's 7,400.
I think you just summed up everything you need to know about Aaron Jones. Like, I love Aaron Jones. Like, I think he's significantly better player than Jamal Williams in every facet. It does not matter if he gets 8 carries, and I think he had 1 catch last week on 4 targets. Like, he just does not make any amount of sense at his price range, not even anywhere close. So for me, I'm not awfully interested in Aaron Jones this week until we see him get more work, basically like he was when Devontae Adams is out or when Jamal Williams is out. Am I wrong for just like completely writing him off, John?
No, I mean the only way I would get him is if I were MMEing, because then you're gonna get him at low ownership, like super low ownership, because everybody is seeing the same things, and it's just the coaching staff is so stupid. Like really, he's infinitely better than Jamal Williams in every single category. Like Kyle said, it's just so annoying that one guy who we've seen be super efficient as a workhorse role. He's a good football player, good receiver. Like, it's just so annoying not to see him used in what type of role that we want to see him used in. But it is what it is, so can't really play him.
Yeah, I actually think the interesting thing here is that right now our ownership has him projected around 15%. I'd be shocked if he gets that high. Yeah, no, I don't think it'll be that high. I think that'll come down as the week goes on. But that could still leave him around 8, 9, or 10%, and that's just like 10% of people I love to play against.
Oh yeah, but I was gonna say Devontae Adams
Yes,
in tournament,
yes.
like he's the play. Like he is the play in this game. 26-point implied team total. I think Devontae Adams is just gonna ball out after a letdown spot last week where Aaron Rodgers basically didn't do any Aaron Rodgers-esque type things. And Adams was only like 4% in his first week back last week. He's going to be low owned again against good Carolina defense. And Carolina, despite being a good defense, they've given up a lot of big games to wide receivers over the past couple seasons. So I like Devontae Adams as a really strong tournament play.
Yeah, I like the Adams call. I think it's pretty sharp. It was weird last week. That total moved 4 points, and like I expected much more from the Green Bay side. Yeah, I think if you're going to run it back, it has to be with McCaffrey. You'd have to look at Adams, and Adams' price has dropped to 6,900, so that's a little bit of a price decrease. So I think it makes sense for a guy like Adams with his upside.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good price to get Adams at. Like, he's not going to be as high. Like, he's been higher owned by a lot at probably higher prices before. So getting Adams at like reasonable ownership at a very discounted cost, I think, is a really sharp call. All right, guys. That's the slate. This is, I believe, the bye week heaviest slate with 6 teams on bye, but probably a significantly better slate than last week. So, any closing words, Bobby?
No, let's have John take us out. He kind of did really well at that last week off the top of his head. So.
Pressure's on. No, we got a lot of good stuff content-wise on the fantasybros.com. Kyle's got a couple articles coming out. I have 2 that'll be coming out, cash game, DraftKings cash game articles coming out tomorrow. Bob's grinding NBA with the core plays, $4.99, the best value in the industry when it comes to NBA. And then we'll obviously have the Discord chat popping off all weekend. So get in there, subscribers only, thefantasybros.com/membership. Good luck this week, and we'll see you guys next week.